what if this thing never gets done? You talk about heavy. That was pretty heavy. And then
hey everyone, what's going on? Back with a new video. I know it's been about a month since I've uploaded a video, but I've been chugging along trying to finish this book, and I finally have. And we are talking about Stephen King's The Stand. This book is ginormous. It's just over 1,100 pages. Holy hell! With obviously either the paperback or the hardcover, depending on what edition you have. This is the uncut edition, which again, this was released in like 1990. Stephen King started writing this book back in like 1975 or 78, I believe. He kept working on The Stand throughout the 70s into the 90s, and while he was doing that, he was also, you know, publishing other stories. But let us dive right into this book. Let me first start off by saying there are enormous amount of characters in this book.
Oh, well, that's just great!
So King has a lot of stories that have, again, with it being a thick book, it has a lot of characters in it, so there's a lot of things happening, whether it is The Stand or even It, Under the Dome, Insomnia, which I don't think Insomnia has so many characters compared to the other ones, but again, it is a very thick book. All right, it's actually that red and white one on my shelf somewhere around there. It's really thick, hard to miss it. So I'm not going to dive into every character throughout The Stand because we would be here forever, and it'd probably be like an hour-long video. Speaking of hour-long video, if you've not checked out my Stephen King's tier list, that one is my longest video, and it is about an hour long. So make sure you check that one out too, and it's always in the link in the description below. But let's start off with the premise of the book. Again, this is a post-apocalyptic book. It is kind of political in a way as well, and it's also fantasy. So it's a good mixture of genres. It is a very interesting book. I will get to my rating a little bit later, but as we dive into this one, we are starting with the main character. Now, Stu Redman is one of the main characters, and we will go into more details about him later. It all starts off in Texas, where this man, Charlie Campion, he crashes into a gas station, and inside Charlie, he is basically has this disease, the spread of the virus that starts off and wipes pretty much the whole population of the world out, except for a few survivors, Stu Redman being one of them. Now, the CDC actually takes, you know, Stu Redman in because kind of like a quarantine just for a precaution. And then later on, Stu Redman kind of like, I don't want to say escapes the hospital or whatever he's staying, but again, he is, you know, profound that he is not contagious and he doesn't have the disease. So you'll just have to find out the details about Stu Redman. But as we go away from Stu Redman, we are going into some other characters that are spread out. Again, I mentioned that started in Texas. We are going to be even going into Colorado in the main parts of the story. And there's also Las Vegas, Nevada is a big part of the setting too. So there's different settings throughout The Stand, which again makes it kind of hard for some people to follow along with the book, which also might be a reason why they either give this a low rating or maybe due to the characters too, just since there's a whole cast of characters to kind of, you know, diagnose, stay with throughout the story. So basically we go across country to a place called Algonquin, Maine, and this is where we find Franny Smith and Harold Lauder. So these two are survivors. I'm not going to mention what happens, but these two actually travel together, and later on they actually meet up with Stu Redman. So it's kind of funny how that works that way. Again, with Stu Redman being all the way from Texas, and obviously Franny and Harold being from Maine, and they kind of meet up together. It's just the way they travel. And again, they're trying to find other survivors together, come together with a whole bunch of other characters as we get closer and make this community. So Franny Goldsmith is pregnant in this story. She starts off with this. You'll realize Harold and them are really actually not a thing, but it gets really kind of messed up in a way later on in the story with those two. And I'm not going to say anything else about that. But as we go on and go forth, we are meeting a whole bunch of other cast of characters, and when the cast of characters meet together, obviously there are two types of sides to this story. So there's the good and light side, and then obviously there's the dark side. If you think of it kind of like Star Wars in a way, I guess you can think of that.
Join me on the dark side of the Force.
The other cast of characters are known as Nick Andros. He is actually a deaf mute, so he actually can read lips. His way of communication is obviously he writes all of his thoughts and jots it all down to communicate with others. And then we have Larry Underwood, which is kind of like a musician, and he's had like a big hit, and he's, you know, he's kind of famous, but he's not really famous in a way. After, you know, things happen throughout his life, when this whole thing starts, he again is leaving on, he meets another person, they travel together, and then so on, and a whole bunch of details go into it. I will leave that to you to figure out, because if you've not read this book, again, it is a mammoth of a book, but it is a great journey, and I am very interested, obviously, diving in more about it. So that's pretty much like the light side of the characters. So there's a whole bunch of other characters that play a small part in it, but let's go to like the dark side of this. And this is where we dive into like one of the really interesting characters that King has created, and that is Randall Flagg, which is also known as the Dark Man. Now, for those who have not known about Randall Flagg, or actually are those King fans out there, you know that Randall Flagg appears in many other King books. With Randall Flagg appearing in The Stand, Randall Flagg also appears in one of the most famous collections that King has created, and that is the Dark Tower series, which you can see up on top of my shelf right there. That is the Dark Tower series, and it is amazing, and I can't wait to talk about that once I get to rereading in those as well. Other stories that mention, obviously, the Dark Man or Dark Tower references are throughout and splattered throughout King books, but the Dark Man, Randall Flagg, is a very interesting character that he has created. Again, he is dark. This is like the fantastical side of him because he has like, interesting power to say the least, but you will have to figure it out once you see it. But he is a very evil man. He is the one that's based off in Las Vegas, Nevada, like I mentioned earlier about that setting. That is kind of like his, if you want to say, base or station, wherever he is. He has a way of communicating with every other person that is obviously still alive, and on the journey of trying to find others to trying to communicate with, making either a community or joining a community that's already been set and put into place. Randall Flagg, we'll get back to him in a second, but as we go back to the light side, when I mentioned a community came together, the main characters like Stu Redman, Franny, Harold, Nick Andros, Larry, all those people, they kind of make this community, and they're trying to make obviously a new way of living with all these people that are obviously dead. The cars are in the street. Again, this is a post-apocalyptic book, so basically bodies are spread everywhere. There's tons of gore in this story. So if you have really queasy stomachs, I mentioned you very shouldn't eat anything while you read this book, or if it obviously doesn't suit you, there are many other King books that I will get to obviously later on, and I recommend, which I mentioned in my Stephen King tier list, that you can check out as well. So as we fast forward, and we're just fast forwarding, a lot of things happen in this. I'm not going to mention what happens because again, I never spoil anything, but once we get towards, the middle or even towards the end, obviously settings are changed. People are traveling different places. People are dying. I can't tell you who is dying in what part of the groups, but again, it is like kind of like a bloodbath. And again, the way of survival in this is something you would imagine if you've seen, zombie movies or post-apocalyptic movies, or read obviously stuff like that, or Swan Song by Robert McCammon, which is a big famous one. It's basically kind of The Stand, just a different author. And I also have that book review as well, so if you haven't done that, check that one out. If you read The Stand and Swan Song, you will see kind of the similarities between each other, and you will have to obviously see how they're both kind of like these post-apocalyptic books that are just massive books. So as I mentioned, Randall Flagg is basically the leader of obviously the dark part of this book, but then on the light part, there's this very old elderly woman named Mother Abigail, and Mother Abigail is a very kind of like religious person, but it brings the community together and tries to obviously see kind of the future of what is going to happen and what is in through what God's eye is. Again, if you don't believe in faith, you don't have to believe in faith to read this book, but you will see that obviously the two different sides is basically light meets dark, and they just clash together in one big battle at the end. Again, I would have finished this book a lot sooner, but again, I was getting sidetracked with a lot of things, but I am glad I finally finished it. My rating still stays the same as it was on my tier list, which this is 4 stars, because I love this book in a way. I like the characters that King has created, especially Randall Flagg, because he pops in other multiple books by Stephen King, and there's heartache, there's sickness, there's sexual desire. There's just so much in this book that King has created, and it's such a great fantastical book with horror and gore, and I love it. But one part of it is why I gave it 4 stars is, with it being long, again, that's one thing with King books, you can kind of lose interest in certain parts of the story because it kind of draws on, so if you're a King fan, you realize with certain books of his. But another big thing is the political side of this book. I am not a big fan of politics. I don't get into them. I don't like talking about them. So if you ask me questions about politics, I will probably change the subject on you. That's just my personal belief. If you are all into politics, so be it. Okay, that is your prerogative. But the political side of this book was just kind of like meh to me, so that made me minus 1 star off of it for it to be in a full 5-star book. But without being that, I would have gave it a full 5-star, because again, this was an amazing journey. He created this book, and it's just funny because I don't remember, but I know there's a part in this book where he got stuck. He got that kind of writer's block.
A mutating flu virus, and any similarities to what's going on now are just too close for comfort. But I got about halfway through that book, and I got these people to Boulder, Colorado, and by that time I had this huge cast of characters. There were 20 or 25, and I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do with these people. They've come to rest in this one place, and the book stayed on a shelf for about 3 weeks while I just went for long walks and tried to figure out what to do with the story. And the worst thing was, I was thinking, what if this thing never gets done? You talk about heavy. That was pretty heavy. And then I remembered something that Raymond Chandler said. He said, when you don't know what to do next, bring on the man with the gun.
and he didn't know what to do until he had a kind of like an interview, which was really interesting. So he decided what to do to make obviously the writer's block go away, and he just started writing after that too. This book is broken into 3 sections: book 1, book 2, and book 3. All the 3 parts of it blend together very well, and again, the characters, I do love the characters. So comment below if you've read The Stand. Let me know what you think about the character. Let me know what you think about the plot and all the settings and changes and stuff you have in here. So Randall Flagg, again, is one of the most creative characters that Stephen King has created. There's a vast amount of like knowledge of what King has done with creating all of his characters. There's so many characters. Maybe I'll do like a Stephen King character video, like the top 10 characters or top 5 characters that I see that King has created. That's actually a pretty good idea. I might have to jot that down a little bit later.
That's a pretty good idea.
But even though I gave it 4 stars, I still highly recommend this book, especially if you like post-apocalyptic books. This is just great. You're, kept on the edge of your seat. Yes, there's parts where it's drawn out, but you can fight through it too. And again, if you listen to Audible like I do, it makes it so much easier to follow along because again, all the characters. This one in the hardcover for some reason didn't have like what I remembered when I first read this book. I also read it as a library book the first time, and I remember there being like just like this table of contents just of all the characters, and I think they do that in Under the Dome, but I'll have to check that out as well. That's not gonna be for a while though. But all right, that is it, everyone. I'm very excited that I uploaded this book review. I'm sorry it took me a while, and again, if it takes me like a month or so to upload a video, I'm either reading a book or I'm just being busy, or obviously, and I'm gonna get more music reaction videos in there as well, which I've actually done a lot more music reaction videos while trying to finish this book. Again, this is a very, very chunky book, and this is the paperback, but it's still about the same pages all throughout with the hardcover as well. But I love this story. It was such a great one, and now I'm very excited since I'm done with The Stand. Since it took me longer than it probably should have if I would have kept reading throughout the weeks, I'm getting back into the next book that's obviously in chronological order, and that is a Richard Bachman book, and it's my favorite Richard Bachman book, and that is The Long Walk, which I will be reading it up in my Bachman books, which is about nope, not that way. Oh, other way, right about there. The Bachman books, The Long Walk is in there. If you listen to me talking about the Bachman books back when I talked about Rage, but if you watch my Stephen King tier list, you will see a little snippet of what I put and what I graded, obviously for The Stand, but also for The Long Walk. So I'm very excited to jump back into that book. It is a very short book, but if you read The Stand or The Long Walk, make sure you comment in the comments below and let me know what you think about it. Thank you, my friends and my subscribers. Please keep spreading the word on my channel. We are getting very close to 1,000 subscribers here and there. Just everything helps with me, and I can't thank you all enough. If you are watching this far, or if you skip ahead, because I do leave obviously the timestamps, so you are allowed to skip ahead if you please. I want to thank you all very much. Again, this is from the bottom of my heart. This is just a fun hobby I love doing, and I just love kind of educating you all on Stephen King, books in general, and music, because both of those are a big part of my life. And again, I can't thank you enough, because this would not be possible without all of you subscribers and my viewers. So thank you very much, and keep spreading the channel. And like I always say, my friends, please read your book cover to cover. We'll see y'all later.